Well, good evening. Trying something a little different here of putting it up on one page and sharing it with my Facebook page. I'm hoping to make this work in the future so that we can have live comments. Tonight's lesson is about the law as teacher. And one of the things I mentioned in my introduction earlier in an earlier video is that the law meant different things to God's people at different times. And so when we talk about the law being a teacher, we need to understand how their understanding of the law grew and changed over time. God meets people where they are, and so he met his believers, his followers, with the law as a teacher where they were. And over time, their understanding of the law changed. Now, this is not a problem. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Don't we hope that for each of us, as time passes, we will become more mature and develop our understanding? Of course we do. So, we want to begin, as we always do, with a word of prayer. Loving Father, we know that you gave us your law because you loved us. You talk about your law in many ways, and it is fashionable today to say that the law is done away with, but you said that the opposite was true, that you not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it, to fill it full. And so we want to understand what that means for us, what the law means for us, and what it means to live a fulfilled life with our knowledge of the law. We ask as we go through this, as usual, that the Holy Spirit will lead us and illuminate us. And I want to thank you for those who join and those who are discovering the tools and finding new truths for themselves, some of which they share with me. And I just thank you for this opportunity in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, all right. I'm going to look at, there's our memory gem. Let's see. Let's make this a little bit bigger so we can see it better. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. This is not the Greek idea of a separation between the body and the soul. This is saying that loving the Lord is a holistic thing, that it takes every fiber of our being. It is our willful, our choosing, our emotional, our intentional desire to worship the Lord. But it also, the soul is the body. With every breath that we take, we want to not just honor the law with lip service, but we want to honor the law in living it to the full. And we'll look at that as we go through this lesson. I find it fascinating. As I was doing this, the lessons, the law is interesting. Now, by the way, this text is in Deuteronomy, literally the second law, from the Greek deuteros, which is second, and nomos, which is law. So Deuteronomy is the second iteration of the law, and it was given by Moses as just before the children of Israel entered the promised land. And so apparently in the law that is enunciated in the book of Deuteronomy is slightly different than the law which is enumerated in Exodus 20, which would make sense over a period of time. So the point I'm simply making here is that the law already had begun to change from its issuance at Sinai to its declaration at Deuteronomy. Now, I'm not going to get into the issue of when Deuteronomy was written and all that. For various reasons, I accept the general idea that Deuteronomy was written when it claims it was. And I'm not, that's just I can go into some of the other issues, but I don't think they're enlightening, edifying. They don't help us. So here is the law as teacher. Here's the way the lesson divided it up. Sunday, to love and fear God. And of course, that is the third angel's message: fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. So we're going to need to love and to fear God. Of course, fear in this sense does not mean to be afraid of in the ordinary sense. God is not someone who's after you, but it really means to be in awe of God. And there's a sense of fear when you see something awesome. It does give you this tingly sense of wow, this is bigger than I am. So that's the real sense here, to love and to fear God. Monday, a witness against you. Well, that's not a happy thing. As the psalmist says, if we should count our sins, none of us would be able to stand. So that's really not a happy thing. But anyway, that you may prosper. This is another part of the law. That's Tuesday's lesson. The toils and struggles of law keepers. And Wednesday and Thursday, Jesus our example. Friday is always what teachers love to do, a review and summation and so forth. But I'm going to take a slightly different approach, not because I disagree with these basic points, but because I think we can simplify and clarify what the law was teaching at various times and what the combination of these different times put together tells us about what the law meant to teach us, what God intends to teach us from the law. Now, I'm not going to pretend to say that my understanding is comprehensive. That would be foolish. For one thing, we haven't seen the end of the world yet. We don't know all the teaching that may be available to us. For another thing, I'm a human being, and I am limited in my ability to comprehend. Certainly comprehend the intentions and the actions of God, who is the infinite one. So, but I do want to talk about what we can know so far, what we can see so far, especially as it is related to us in the books of the Bible, in the scriptures. And I have here, if you look at I have that strip above there that's orange to dark red. And the purpose of that is to show that this understanding of the law was a continuum. It was not something that was fixed in time, but as the children of God tried to understand the law, as they lived with the law, as they tried to live out the law, as they moved through history, they learned from the past. Again, that's what we all do. One should hope. And that this is a continuum. And the three lessons that the Bible teaches us, and they're implicit in the divisions of the lesson that we have, was the first thing is that God is teaching his people, I am different. I am different than the other gods. The second thing that he is teaching is the law is a guardian. The law is a protection. I often say the law is the guardrail that keeps you from flying off the road into the abyss. It won't get you up the mountain, and it won't do a lot of other things, but it will keep you safe if you can observe it. The law is not enough. And this is a difficult lesson for all of us. We think the law, we elaborate on the law, but the law is simply not enough. The law was wonderful. The law was good, is good, as the Apostle Paul tells us, but it was simply not enough. So, those are the lessons that the children of Israel and God's people learned over a period of history that was spanned better than 1,000 years, 1,500 years approximately. And so we're going to see how that progression of learning, that continuous learning, played itself out, how it worked out. The law's teacher. First of all, I am different. The first 4 commandments are fascinating. You shall have no other gods before me. And I put this in, I'm not in competition with other gods. And you cannot curry favor with me and others. For the ancient people, the world was full of gods because they did not have what we would call a scientific worldview. And so when they saw something massive and powerful and overwhelming, that thing became a god. The rivers that could feed you when they, like the Nile, when they deposited silt, were benevolent gods. But when they flooded, they might wash away your home. They might drown you or your children. They were capricious gods, and there were so many of them. Excuse me. There were so many of them and they were in themselves in conflict. And so what you tried to do was pick the winning side. There would be many gods, and you would try to sort of bargain your way with sacrifices and services and so forth, things like that, to get enough gods on your side to protect you from the other gods who might be angry. And God, Yahweh, is telling them, no, there's no competition. I'm first. That's it. You're not going to build an alliance of gods. You can't curry favor with me. You can't buy me off. I'm going to ask for sacrifices, but that's for a different purpose. And that's going to be not in the Ten Commandments. That's going to be in Leviticus, and we can get into that, excuse me, at a different time. So that's the first thing. No gods before me. Secondly, no images. And images we may think of as paintings or as carvings in a wall, but also sculptures of any size. And the ancients, and frankly, many people today, like to carry good luck charms. You've seen people with a rabbit's foot. I've often thought that was rather strange, since it didn't appear to do the rabbit much good. But you would carry a talisman, a charm, something on yourself that would protect you. This is carried over where you might wear a St. Christopher's medal or something like that. And I'm not condemning anybody, but this is a violation of the second commandment, because God is telling me you can't buy favor with me, and you can't use me in any way. You can't take my image or the image of anything I've made and carry it on yourself as a protection. Now, if you pray to me, if you serve me, I will act as your defender. Doesn't mean you'll never have any problems, but it means that I will help you through those problems. But you can't just make a representation of me of any sort, put it in your pocket and say, there, the bad spirits or the bad things are warded off. They can never happen to me. It just doesn't work that way. And it isn't designed to work that way either. So, no images, no conjuring using my name. Now we get into swearing, and swearing is a form of conjuring. When you say, use God's name to curse someone or something, you are violating the third commandment. But it's not just primarily in saying blasphemous things. It is that they would use the name of their God to cast a spell. They might want to curse an enemy. They might want to cast a spell to give themselves prosperity, or love potions, or fertility for their crops, anything like that. And God's saying, you can't use me. God, I'm different. I'm not like the other gods. You can't do this with me. They will tell you that you can. I'm not that way. I am different. And it is so different that they continually, God's people, the children of Israel, especially in the Old Testament, continually fall away from them. Their relatives are the Canaanites, and they continually fall into the worship of Canaanite gods, because it seems like that ought to work. And we're pretty much the same way. We think that, and don't get me wrong, I'm taking a number of supplements and doing things during this COVID crisis to keep me healthy, but I understand that none of this can guarantee that I won't be hit by a car or lightning won't strike my house or something. When we had the derecho a few weeks ago, dropped a tree on the house. But my point is that you cannot use God's name. The third commandment is not using God's name as an omen, as a conjuring tool to cast spells of good or bad. That's not the way God works. And the fourth commandment is, I am the creator. Don't forget that. Now, that may seem, what does that make him? How's that different? Well, the answer is, in every other creation myth of which I'm aware, the one who ends up creating the world is in a struggle with the sea serpent or some negative evil power, and it's a near thing. They almost don't manage to create the world. And for example, when in the creation account in Genesis 1, where he says he made Leviathan, well, Leviathan, the great sea serpent, is by many accounts of the Old Testament era, the creation idea. This is one of the villains with whom the Creator God struggles. But in Genesis, it's just one of the creatures he made. I made this thing, and I made this. It's not a big deal to me. So, and that's why, of course, don't forget it. Is remember, you knew this, and the way to keep this in your mind, to not forget that I am the creator of everything, is to remember my day. Remember the creation week, and remember the Sabbath day, which was set aside. So that's the first part. And this is very important. I am different is very important at the very earliest portions of the God's encounter with his people after they've been in slavery for so long. When he gives the law, and when they're in the wilderness, and we know they tried the golden calf and so forth, they are forgetting it, and it's a problem they will have for centuries in the future. But that's the first thing he has to know, that I've brought you out of slavery. I've delivered you. I'm your conqueror, but I'm also your husband. I'm also the one who cares for you. And don't forget that. Don't forget that. I'm not like these other gods. I'm not capricious. I'm not angry and have to be placated all the time. Now we say that, there were these texts in the Old Testament that talked about God's anger. Well, partially that's simply because God is angry at sin, and who wouldn't be? Who shouldn't be? If we're angry when we see evil hurting children, human trafficking, we don't have to be angry at the people doing it, but we can certainly be angry at the sin that is causing it. And God feels that way. And we how can we be comforted by a God who cares less than we do? But it also is simply that's something they understand. And this comes along with the idea of why so many of these commandments, there was a death penalty. Well, understand that in the ancient world, they didn't have prisons. There were just, there was slavery, which was a kind of a prison, but might not be, depending on how it worked. But until, we have Joseph in a prison, but these children of Israel in the wilderness, they're not going to have a prison. It's kind of hard to pick up stakes and move your prison with you. And as they understood this, as they understood what was happening, he had rescued them. He was their conqueror. He was their general. But he exacted a certain amount of tribute, and this tribute was in terms of the Ten Commandments. Okay, you're my people. And it starts out with the declaration of grace. I have brought you out of the land of Egypt, have brought you out of slavery. And in order for us to continue this relationship, here's how you need to live. And if you stop living this way, it isn't that God hates us. It's just that we break the bonds which hold us to him. And for them, that was frightening. And so every time that one of the commandments is violated, there was like treason. And so since they didn't have a lot of other penalties, although there was fourfold restitution for theft, for example, about the only penalty that would express this and make it clear to people was death. People don't learn easily. All right. The law is teacher, and I'm going to go into this, the law as is a guardian. The first 4 commandments, the law is teacher, the law is a guardian. The first 4 commandments protect the relationship with God. That's what he's saying. They keep you in my care. They keep you in my nation. They keep you in a position where I can help you. And that's important for you to understand. So you want to need to stay in my care. I'm your guardian, but here's how you protect that. Here's how you keep me as your guardian. It's not a matter of I'm going to reject you. It's a matter of if you don't do these things, you've rejected me. And then we hear this throughout the Old Testament. God says, you rejected me. And then the last 6 commandments makes an orderly society possible. If you have a society where parents are not honored, where murder is okay, where adultery and stealing and perjury and all these things, when these things are permissible, then the society breaks down. And there are plenty of examples in history, and we seem to be living through one right now. So that's something that's really important to understand. And so this is the way the law functions as a guardian. It guards the relationship of his people to him, and it also guards then the relationship of people to one another, and makes a peaceful, prosperous society possible. Possible, not guaranteed. Possible. These are preconditions, and if you have a relatively prosperous society, and these things begin to crumble, and all 10 of them, they begin to crumble, then you're going to have society beginning to fall apart. Anyway, moving on now. The law's teacher. I am different. Now that you see that bar at the top, because there's a continuum of understanding, and it starts out with them understanding that God is different. That's the first thing they get out of the Exodus. And it's important for them to do this. They've been living in Egypt for 400 years as a people, and Egypt has more than 1,500 named deities. In other words, there are more than 1,500 deities, gods, in the Egyptian religion, and we don't know the names of all of them. They may have had names, but we don't know them. But we do today. We know the names of 1,500 different gods, and the God is not like any of them. One of the ones that always kind of gets me is the Egyptian god of Sobek, which is the alligator god. And it is perhaps possible that when Pharaoh ordered that the Hebrew boys be thrown into the Nile, that it was a form of worship of Sobek, because that was probably what was going to happen to those infants. Whether they drowned or not, they were likely going to be eaten by the crocodiles. I didn't say it was pretty. I said, again, that's why I don't care much for Sobek. Anyway, so there were 1,500 gods, and some of them, like Sobek, were pretty brutal. In fact, more than pretty brutal. So, And then in Canaan, where they were going to go, and who were their relatives, and I keep saying this because it's important to understand, that was their relatives. And because it was their relatives, they were always falling into those practices. Those were their practices. So there they are. That's the Exodus. Their first understanding, the most important understanding for them. Remember, God meets people where they are. And where they are is they don't understand that God is different than every other God. And he has to tell them this repeatedly. He has to make this known. So that's the first thing. And that's their understanding. God meets them where they are, and the first thing they get is his difference. He's different than any other God. Then comes the conquest. And at the conquest, they continually have this emphasis on the fact that God is different than the other gods they know about. But there's beginning to see, you can see it's turning orange up there a little bit. There's a beginning to understand that God is also their guardian. Because when they keep him in their plans, they keep him, they ask him what to do, and when they obey his directions, they have success. When they disobey, like Achan, or when Joshua makes a treaty with the people that the Gibeonites who tricked him, he hadn't asked God. In all those situations, what we're talking about is that that when they got outside of God's control and God's protection, they had problems, and so they're beginning to understand, just beginning to understand that God is their guardian as well as well as the fact that he's very different than others. Then comes, after the conquest, comes the time of the judges. And here we get an increasing knowledge of the fact that God is their protector. When the judge comes and rules, and they follow him, they have prosperity, they have peace. When a judge doesn't, when there is no judge, and when they fall away from the practices, because we're told that repeatedly, when we fall away from the practices of the judge, then they have punishment, and they say they suffer. And so they're beginning to understand not only that their God is different, although this is going to be a problem. They're going to have a problem understanding this all the way until the exile. And probably well into the exile. They're not going to understand exactly. They understand God's different, but they don't really get it yet. But they also are beginning to see that when they behave, the law, they don't suffer as much. And that God is their guardian. The law is a guardian. Then we come to the monarchy, and the same thing it just continues the same process. God is different than the other gods, and when the monarch is good and obeys the Lord and helps and leads the people into proper worship and proper obedience, when that happens, the kingdom is prosperous. The kingdom, there's peace. People have good crops, and they have peace. They don't have wars. And so, the understanding is slowly growing, but very slowly, because people were all that way. It's not just them. It's not no good looking back and saying they were stupid or they were not wise. People of all kinds, that's just the way we are. We're very slow to learn. We have certain assumptions. We come with a certain mindset, and it's very difficult for us to give that. Then comes the exile. Now, mind you, and I'll mention this again because it is really a useful memory device. This is a lot of time that has passed. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, it's 400 years of slavery, approximately. Now, these are not exact numbers, but it's approximately 400 years of slavery. It's approximately 400 years of the judges. It's approximately 400 years of the monarchy. And then the exile is 400 years. So we have slavery, the judges, the monarchy, the exile. That's at least 1,600 years. In practice, it's actually a little bit longer. A long time from slavery to the end of the exile. The exile, and then there's the post-exile, which lasts about 400 years. So you have this thing going on here. They're beginning to understand at the exile that not only is that the law is the guardian. In fact, when they come to the return after the exile, there's your 400 years. The exile is only about 70 years, but the return then is 400 years. You see that sharp line up there because they understand two things. God is different, and that the law is a protection. And they begin to understand that it's because they ceased to follow God, they ceased to worship God as he is, that they were losing out, that they were thrown into exile. And so there's a sharp line, and now it takes a while through the exile for them to understand this. But when they come back to the return, they aren't going to do that again. They aren't going to be thrust into the exile again, although they have a problem. You read Ezra and Nehemiah. But when you read the post-exilic prophets like Zechariah, they say, well, how do we keep this feast? And how do we do that thing? And their concern is upon the precision of the law. And this, as time goes on, and even though they've returned, they do not have a prophet. I'm sorry, that's later after that. But they do not have. They don't rule their own land. Whoever's the governor is at the pleasure of the whatever emperor happens to be ruling at that time, and they're still not in control of their own fate. And so they reason that, well, before the exile, before we were this terrible disaster that destroyed the temple and destroyed our nation, we were too much like the nations around us, and we didn't pay enough attention to the law. And so afterwards, what they do is they spend almost all of their energy. What's the law? Exactly. Let's be precise, and let's be separate from other people. We got to be like them. We intermarried. We did all these things. And that's what led to our destruction. We don't want to do that again. And so their focus was almost exclusively on the law and on separation. And we see this in great contrast when we get to stark contrast when we get to the time of Jesus. Because there, he says, You tithe the mint and the anise and the cumin. Have you ever thought about how small those seeds are? Counting one out of every 10. It's crazy. He says, well, I'm not upset, but one should be done and not the other. But he said, you missed the big point. That he missed the big point of the law. And of course, you have, as I've mentioned a number of times, it's fascinating because Herod was an Edomite, an Idumean. But he was raised in Jewish culture, and he always wanted to curry favor with the Jews. He was their king appointed by Rome. And so he became punctilious about certain parts of the law. He wouldn't let his image be on a coin, for example, whereas he was perfectly happy to murder lots of people. But Jesus is saying, you don't get this. And the contest over what the law is about is something that happens repeatedly in all the Gospels. Jesus does something on the Sabbath. Well, you're breaking the Sabbath. And he's saying, no, you don't get what the Sabbath's about. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, the Sabbath was made to liberate man from labor, to liberate man from the everyday concerns, and not set up so that man would serve it in a certain way. that man would be, he would be spending all of his day figuring out if he was doing exactly the right thing. You don't get that. That's not what it's about. And he repeatedly, and it's clear in the Gospel of John especially, that he does this intentionally. He wants to provoke these discussions about the law. And then we see the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and we have the famous discontinuities where Jesus says, "You have heard it said, 'Thou shalt not kill.' But I say," he's claiming the role of Moses, in fact, claiming the role of God. He is now the lawgiver. "But I say, if you hate your brother, you're guilty." The law was simply about physical murder. And Jesus says you don't get it. The law is pointing to something bigger, something more important. And when you take the law word for word as the totality, it's not enough. We need to be holier than thou shalt not. We need to understand what it is to live, and to live abundantly, to live kingdom life in a broken world. And that's why the law is not enough. And that's why Jesus has to come, for many of their other reasons. But he has to come to show us what the law was intended to teach. He comes, as he says, to fulfill the law, to fill it full. He also wants us to live a fulfilled life. He wants our lives to be as full as possible. So the law is not about limiting what we can do. The law is about helping us live to the full. One translation of John 10:10 says that. I've come that they might have life and live it to the full. That's what we're talking about here. And when the Messiah comes, he begins to teach people the law is not enough. This is what the law looks like in action in Jesus. This is what was intended from the beginning. This is what the law is about. It's not about thou shalt not. That part of the law is the guardian. That part of the law, as I often say, is the guardrail. It keeps us from just flying off into the abyss. But it's not enough, and it never will be enough. That isn't going to happen. So that's the way that, and do you see how this takes place now? The law, God meeting people where they were. And each time, the prophets are guiding people toward a balanced norm where the law matters. But the law is for a purpose. It is not an end in itself. And that's what we miss. The law is not an end in itself. It is not. And it is also not, excuse me, it is not a ladder we can climb. It is not a series of things that we can do in order to be saved. Because we have to understand the sin problem is bigger than those concerned. It's deeper than these things. And we will not ever fully keep the law as long as we are sin bearers. We bear sins. We carry it. We carry the virus, as it were. So that's the purpose of the law. The law was teaching. At each time, they understood the law differently because they were in different circumstances. And they also had history to draw upon. They had past learning to draw upon. Unfortunately, some of us don't seem to be able to do that. We need to learn from the law, too. We need to learn what the law is really there for and what the purpose of this whole process is. And finally, we're getting close here, yes. I want to spend the last few minutes on a quotation from C.S. Lewis because it is so marvelous to understand the law is not enough. The law is, the commandment, holy, just, and good, as Paul says. It's a wonderful thing. It just doesn't happen to be enough. A bicycle is a wonderful thing, but if you need to get to town 30 miles away, in a half an hour, it's not enough. You need a car. You need something that'll get you there. And the law has a purpose, but it is a limited purpose. And again, it's primarily a safeguard. It's primarily something that keeps us from getting in worse trouble. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. But the law is not enough. And I want to share this quotation from C.S. Lewis. I love this quotation, and it is so amazing. Now, he uses the word morality, and it's not incorrect. But we're talking about, we could call it salvation, we could call it righteousness. Any of those designations would be accurate. Morality is a mountain which we cannot climb by our own efforts. This is the mistake. We see the law, it looks relatively simple, and we say, I can do that. You know, that's what the children of Israel said at Sinai. All the Lord has said, we will do. And it took them centuries to learn they couldn't do it, and that the law would not be enough, and that the Messiah was necessary to deliver them from their sins and to embody, literally, what the law was meant to be. Morality is a mountain which we cannot climb by our own efforts. We cannot get there. We cannot keep the law by our own efforts. It just won't happen. And if we could, there's that picture of the mountain there. If we could, we should only perish in the ice and the unbreathable air of the summit. In other words, even if we could get there, it wouldn't be enough. The law is never going to be enough. Even if there was some way we could climb that mountain, we would end up bereft, lacking those wings with which the rest of the journey has to be accomplished. The law doesn't get us all the way home. Now, let me get out of the way here. The law doesn't get us all the way home. Even if we could keep it, which we can't ascend from there. For it is from there, from the mountaintop, where we cannot reach on our own efforts, and if we could, it would kill us. But it is from there that the real ascent begins. Once we kept the law, you know, Jesus has this parable where the servant and the master work all day, and then the servant then comes home and he washes his master's feet, and he prepares a meal, and he serves the meal. And the master doesn't say, well done, because Jesus says the servant has only done that which has been required. So if we could keep the law, we would only have met the minimum. And that's what Paul is saying, and that's what the Old Testament is saying, and that's what C.S. Lewis is saying here. It is from there, from the summit of the law, if you will, from the keeping the law, that the real ascent begins. It's not enough to say I didn't kill somebody, I didn't hate somebody. We have to say, it's not enough that I didn't commit physical adultery. Yeah, I did lust after someone. All of these things demonstrate that when we conquer the law, the way you conquer a mountain, if we could, which we cannot, we've only done the minimum. We've only got started. It is from there, the mountaintop of morality, the mountaintop of keeping the law, that the real ascent begins. The ropes and axes, those tools that we use to help us to get there, are done away. And the rest is a matter of flying. Oh, friends, that's what the law is here to teach us. The law is here to teach us that we need wings. Yes, it shows us that we fall short. That's part of what it's a ruler. It's a thermometer. It tells us what condition we're in. But even more significant than that, it tells us that once we've gone there, we still need wings. We're not equipped for the world to come. It takes the grace and the power of Jesus Christ to allow us to take wing. For me, this is a beautiful thing. It helps me keep perspective to recognize that I am never going to be good enough. That's important, because thinking I will be good enough, thinking I can be good enough, is simply a way of simply what's called self-righteousness. It's nothing else, just self-righteousness. I can do it. I can't do it. But that's where the good news comes in. Someone's already done it. Someone has ascended that mountain. Someone has flown upward and finished the ascent to the heavenly places. And as Paul tells us, when we are baptized into Christ, we sit down with him in heavenly places. We are counted as having made the flight ourselves. And the process of sanctification is not simply the process of helping us keep the law perfectly. It is the process of teaching us to fly. And like fledglings, we won't, get it perfect. It's the work of a lifetime. We'll never do it in this lifetime, because sin is still in us, whether we do it or not. There's the power of sin, the presence, and the guilt of sin, the power of sin, and the presence of sin. And justification deals with the guilt of sin. Sanctification deals with the power of sin. And that's what this learning to fly is. It's slowly learning. But we still need the last moment. That glorification, when we shall be changed, and this mortality puts on immortality, the corruptible puts on incorruption, and then we shall fly. For we shall meet him in the air. That's what the text says. We shall fly, my friend. That is a promise of God. And that is how the law, and learning about the law and understanding the law, can be good news in itself. Your efforts are never going to be enough. Okay. So surrender to the one whose efforts were sufficient. Give up. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try to live a good life. Give up expecting to do it on your own power. It will not happen. And it will make you and everyone around you miserable. As Martin Luther said, if ever a monk could have become a saint by his monkish works, I was that monk. He beat himself. He fasted. He did all of these things. And at the end of it, he said to his mentor, "Why is God so angry with me?" And the man replied, "Brother Martin, God is not angry with you. You are angry with God." And we often are in the same situation. We do our best, and the best is not enough, and we're angry at God, when we should say, "Thank you, Lord, for revealing this to me, and also for providing the remedy." Well, that's the way the law is a teacher. As usual, if you're interested in materials, I had some doing over the last week's video, but I'm going to continue putting up these videos on my Patreon channel, which you can see there, patreon.com Bible Journeys. If you have any questions or suggestions, please, I'm delighted to hear from you at BibleJourneys@yahoo.com. Well, that's our lesson for this evening. I hope that it has been the good news for you. I hope that it is as encouraging for you as it is for me. And to realize that our belief in Christ is really, really on solid ground. Well, until next week then, may the good Lord bless and keep you. And if He's willing, we'll meet again. Thanks and good evening.